Our final presenter of day 2 and to close us off for EMSA 2022 is Duarte Ferreira, who is the Global Business Development Director from Efacec, and he is going to be speaking to us about the EV war. It's a very bold title, and he's going to be mentioning about the development perspectives in electric mobility. I think this is a great talk to finish off day 2 with us to look at and what can we do in the development opportunities available within electric mobility as we close off EMSA 2022. Duarte, are you with us, sir?
Yes, good morning or good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, sir. We're going to hand straight over to you so we don't eat into any more of your time, and you can take it away for us, sir.
Okay. If somebody can share the presentation that I have prepared. Is it on? Okay, there you go. All right. So my name is Duarte Ferreira. I am calling in from Lisbon, beautiful city, capital of Portugal. And thank you for the invitation to the EMSA 2022. I actually know South Africa and the e-mobility sector. I've been there, visited several times. I'm going to be speaking about the EV combat. It's actually, the perspectives on how this sector is developing. It's developing in Europe, it's developing in USA, it's developing in Africa, and where South Africa within the African region is actually one of the pioneer countries in terms of electric mobility development. If you can scroll the page, please. I'm not seeing the presentation itself. So, okay, there you go. Next one, please. Next one. All right. So the perspective on investment that you see lining up for the e-mobility sector, both in the vehicle side as well as the charging manufacturing side, is unquestionable. Even yesterday, in his speech to the nation, President Biden has already reaffirmed his willingness to place in the US more than 500,000 charging points for the network. That means that the development is underway, and there is no question that electric mobility is here to stay. Same thing goes for governments across pretty much all of the country regions. So Europe, with the package that is running for that, with countries banning the ICE cars up to between 2030, 2035, and that's also becoming true for the African region. I don't think that in this sector there is a big difference between the developments and the status of developments between the big blocks, being it Europe, North America, Latin America, or even Africa, or even Asia. So I think that the pace that the revolution is steady, and it's actually lining up with not much differences between the countries and between the economic blocks. Next slide, please. If you look into this, you see that there are several companies, big oil majors, utilities, and even automakers building their networks, building their plans to invest. And these numbers that are showing from the Bloomberg New Energy Finance polls, which actually are now have been updated with the 2022 figures, show that companies like Engie from France, Shell from the Netherlands, BP, Vattenfall, Allego, or others, are actually climbing up their investment pace by having a lot of charging points, charging connectors in the field. And we are talking about only public infrastructure. If we speak even about home charging, then the numbers would be double or even triple. So that means that the EV combat is here to stay, and let's try to have a look at how it is being done. Next slide, please. So from our point of view, and again, we look at this from being a charging hardware manufacturer, you see that the playfield and the combat arena for e-mobility is actually being driven between 3 pillars. The oil and gas majors that own the points and want to migrate their carbon model or carbon footprint into a non-carbon footprint, to be carbon zero. And that means that you see big plans from oil majors, so BP, Total, Repsol, even Galp from Portugal, or even other companies within Africa, starting to decarbonize and starting to becoming an energy company, which means a clash with utility drivers. So utility companies that are already in this sector now see the other playfield combating for this. And that means combating the net zero growth, combating in electric mobility, among other fields. And so obviously this will have a big playing role and a very large new way of looking at this model, and this means that utilities, oil and gas, and then finally the folks that produce the automotive. So being it automotive, not so much the vehicle. So because we can talk about electric mobility for boats, we can talk about last mile, we can talk about cars, or we can even talk about planes, because there are already some inception even in electric mobility for airplanes. And that means new business models. That means a new sector coming in into the networks of the cities, into the networks of the that are already installed. So do we have powering enough or not? And then again, the regulatory powering. So municipalities, mainly the cities, will have a role play to play as well. Next slide, please. I'm not seeing again the presentation, please. There you go. So next slide, please. Okay, all right, that's fine. What I want now to do is to try to see how the sector is organized currently. And you see that in the charging side, you have actually 4 blocks of where the companies are moving themselves in terms of the ecosystem, looking at the charging pillar. So one is clearly the people producing the hardware. Okay. The other one is the charging network providers, so the CPOs, the charge point operators, companies like Allego, Ionity, or even in South Africa, others that I know well. Then you have a lot of innovation around this on the software side, on the way to deliver charging, on the pricing models also arriving. And then finally, you have new incumbents arriving into play with different ways of investing. So what I'm now going to do is to try to make a trip over some of the largest investment players in the field to show how they are playing in terms of the EV networks and the EV mobility from a charging point of view. Next slide, please. Next one. Okay. So there are several business models that we can look into. Next one. Next slide, please. Next one. Thank you. So there are several business models by which several companies that are known for everybody are actually trying to manage themselves. One of them is clearly the CPO, charge point operated direct revenue. So people that want to get monetizing the act of charging a car by operating then the public networks. That's the case of now today what's called BP Pulse in the UK. It used to be ChargeMaster. They are now refurbishing and rebranding their networks. Or you can actually look into indirect way of being a CPO, but by managing the network, but not owning the infrastructure. That's the case of IKEA. If you look into IKEA and their compromise in terms of sustainability, they actually have their last mile delivery becoming electric, pretty much. And what they are now doing is they are committing their supply chain to electrify, being on a transport side or by making available at the stores charging points. And that's something that's also interesting to see. So direct revenue model, indirect revenue model by being a CPO. Also, smart platform development in terms of aggregating CPOs into a certain platform, and by being able to advertise, like to charge your car, what's the best price for a certain consumer to charge their car at a certain time. And that's the case of the synergies of the smart platform development that you see in several companies. So this is Charge Your Car is an example. I could give others, and they basically give the EV driver the best price at a certain time that they can use in the networks available for their own territory or for their own geography. Then you have the smart charging. Smart charging is arriving to be able to balance the load balance between the network, the car, by using and introducing V2G into the scene, and that companies like Enervalis or others are actually also doing that. And then you have other players, CPO players like Octopus Energy that I find very interesting from the UK. They are now starting to internationalize their business model, which turn all of this fully digital. So they do not own the network, they do not own the software, they just own a CRM platform where the customer can opt in and opt out on a daily basis or a monthly basis for a fee to have all of it together. So they have the service of the car, they have the charging, and they have an adaptable pricing model daily, monthly, bi-weekly, so that the EV driver can benefit from the best rates. So they do an all-in strategy, which is very interesting, and it's growing very steadily in the UK and elsewhere. Next slide, please. Other business models that can also come into play. The one from typically from an end-to-end energy player like EDP from Portugal or Repsol. We could even nominate other utility companies from other countries where they just look into serving the home charging market, the public charging market, by offering different price ranges into that. But they rely on the fact that they have and they own the customer on the residential or the commercial distribution of energy, or even other disciplines of renewables, and they come into play by creating another pillar within themselves by organically growing into electric mobility. Or then you have Tesla, which offers a bundled charging and vehicle possibility, so that they create spaces within the territories where they sell their cars, as you know very well, where you can charge. Right now, Tesla and the supercharging Tesla network, which is very good as well, they are now looking into, again, I don't see my chart, they're looking into opening up their networks into other brands, and that's a debate that is going on right now. Finally, you have some other models that are not so common to see, but you also see them. One of them clearly is just being a solutions provider, a hardware provider like Efacec or other players in the field. But then you have some other countries where Portugal is a very distinguished place, whereby the network is managed by a public company. So that means that all the chargers need to be connected to a platform, and from there they offer the service. That has been done to assure capacity for all the players to be inside the market, to all the players to not to coordinate pricing on the charging model. So Mobier is a platform that is there to stay, and is actually an agnostic player to regulate the charging network that goes into the country. And then finally, you have players like EV Connect or Object that offer you all of the models, the IT models that you need to build all of this infrastructure. So several business models that we see now consolidating. We see now acquisitions in the field. We see now acquisitions in e-mobility, and that's what we are now going to try to show you by showing some of the latest moves from companies like Shell or BP or others. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So Shell has a very interesting setup. They have created their own charging point operator called NewMotion or Shell Recharge, depending on where you operate. They also bought, as you know, Greenlots in the US so that they can have a very good reach into the USA market, right? Same thing goes for partnerships that they develop with competing ultra-fast charging networks like Ionity. Or then, if you look into Shell, also they have created the possibility to integrate a hardware supplier like Ubitricity that they bought last year to be able to offer home charging products into their own customers. So that in this case, they have decided to integrate a hardware platform for AC only, not so much DC. And currently they have frame agreements also for DC, including other players. Finally, they are also looking through the Shell Ventures always into innovation into how to drive, in this case, driverless cars like Aurora, a platform that is being invested, an AV platform that is being invested by Shell, or other investments that they have done of companies that are delivering a service in terms of energy, in terms of storage. And if you look into their play field and track record of investments, it's pretty interesting. Next slide, please. So Shell is a good example. Next one could be, next slide, please. Thank you. BP, so another player with a very interesting play field that they are looking into. And again, they have followed a very similar strategy to the one of Shell. So they have their own product developed within the UK with ChargeMaster, now called Pulse. As you know, they are now developing a network in Europe and also elsewhere to invest, right? They also even have investments now in the States with Ampel. They have also created a 20 million investment in StoreDot, which is a battery pack startup that they are now doing very well. And then finally, FreeWire Technologies with their mobile charging capacity that they are doing. In terms of partnerships, they have also obviously done a big agreement, a large agreement with Renault Nissan, an OEM that everybody knows, or by recently signing an MOU with NIO. BP again has a very ambitious plan to have charging available everywhere, given their new purpose strategy installed a year ago. And again, is another player playing in several fields of the e-mobility value chain. Just like Shell, as you can see, it's a very interesting business model as well. Next chart, please. Let's look into another oil and gas major, Total, from France. Again, they have interesting, possibilities to share. They have invested and co-invested with their own French players like Schneider, okay, that everybody knows well. They have invested in terms of having their mobility now called Total EV Charge, with more than 10,000 public charge available in France, and they are also now investing in the territories where they have good presence through their own networks in other markets, especially in Latin America. Also, interesting to see that Total is not leaving anything to chance, because they are investing in Formula E, which is the alternative to Formula One or Formula E racing, with the Aztec Cheetah, the team there that has been champions a year ago, and they are now keep progressing on that sponsorship to mark a point that e-mobility is here to stay, and that their new motto is coming towards electric mobility. And then finally, they have several investments in terms of startups that they keep following with their Total Ventures arm. Okay, with that, let's move now into other players, not so much in the field of. Again, here you can see Repsol from Spain. I will not lose too much time with Repsol. I would like you, please, can you share the next slide, please? Yes. So now let's look into a little bit into how are some electrical utility companies forging their or responding to the oil and gas majors. So clearly, what they are doing, the first thing they do is to make alignments with EVSE charging manufacturers, just like Efacec and others, where EDP has agreements for the global operation in Portugal, Spain, Brazil, in African countries that speak Portuguese, as well as North America. And then they also have developed a very strong solution. They started by developing a very strong solution to AC for condominiums, for destination charging. And then finally, they do obviously their partnerships with several OEMs of automotive. However, the distinctiveness aspect of the utility companies is actually the services that they are trying to render, the services that they offer to the EV driver, by capturing an all-in strategy to have one consumer that probably today is having a contract of residential distribution for energy, or with even green energy, by migrating them into e-mobility. And that's what companies like EDP and other utility majors are doing, by responding to the incumbents that we see from oil and gas majors. And now, lately in 2021, and I don't have a chart analyzing that, you also see some telecom providers coming into play by also asking for or trying to have a snapshot of this e-mobility playfield. And you will see that the trend now will be oil and gas majors, utility companies, as well as the telecom players. Next slide, please. I don't have much more to show, because I think that this gives you a very good aspect of how people are competing. But NLX, from the NL Group, probably one of the largest utilities in the world, from Italy, with very good presence worldwide, as you know, has been following a very distinctive stand on how to develop their own charging. So the first thing they did was to design their own chargers, public and non-public, okay? Also, they have migrated and incorporated their own alignment in terms of producing partners. And with that, they have developed their own network. So they brand NLX or Endesa X in Spain or in some other markets, and they have been doing this for quite a while. It's probably one of the largest networks in terms of charge point operators that is available. And they have also been able to invest in companies like Smart Charge, where they are looking into the V2X possibility. So with that, I would have more to show, but for the sake of time, I would leave this up to questions as well. And I will close it here, and thanks for the time today.
Duarte, thank you very much for your presentation. I mean, it's very interesting to hear about, you say the combat between the old traditional oil companies, the new kids on the block, and kind of everyone in between. In your opinion, as somebody from the international players, what can an emerging e-mobility space like South Africa, what can we learn about what's happened overseas in other economies and other countries, and what learnings can we kind of take forward in South Africa in a South African context?
Right. I think there are probably 2 or 3 aspects that I don't want to give any counseling to anybody. The only thing that I can say is that, first of all, the first incumbent investment in charging has been probably something to learn, which means that a lot of people wanted to invest in AC and DC. Then they wanted to invest in speedy DC, so ultra-fast charging, which is probably the most powerful charger that you see today. But that has been done without looking into the other verticals that need to keep pace. And one of them is the OEMs and the battery sizes that can absorb the amount of charging that is available. So that's probably one of the counseling factors that I would give, is that always invest steadily and modularly. It's not needed sometimes, and I speak against the interests of someone like Efacec, you do not need to invest in an ultra-fast charger sometimes when you just need a charger of 50 kilowatts. Why do you go to 100, 150, or 350? When sometimes 22 kilowatts, 50 kilowatts is more than enough for the current, today, 2022, March, when it's the amount of energy needed and the technology pace, it still needs to keep up. Maybe in 1 year's time it's going to be different, but you need to scale your investment steadily and wisely, because the worst thing that can happen is to have a charger in the field working, but not having customers or not having charging acts to do because the cars are not there, simply. Okay, so that's the first lesson. The second one is to look always very carefully into whether the powering network in a certain city, neighborhood, little town, large town, is actually available to be able to absorb the needed energy to comply with the number of cars or fleets available. So that means that sometimes you need to do the powering up of the current infrastructure first before installing the chargers. I've seen a lot of countries and a lot of cities doing this mistake by forgetting that the needed network to power up the scale is actually sometimes forgotten. And this investment is what I call the hidden cost. And finally, always look into the new trends and the new technologies available. V2X is coming, which is possible in a country like South Africa, or a country like Portugal, or a country like the US. Wireless charging has been something that has been important, but currently I don't see it as an alternative, a real alternative for e-mobility charging possibility. So with that, I think that it's important to keep, a very humble and very open viewpoint. And finally, the last thing that I always listen to from the agents of e-mobility complaining sometimes is the pace at which regulatory decisions to authorize a certain charger to a certain street, to a certain place, takes too much time. I see projects being decided in Europe that take more than 1 year in regulatory. 1 year is too much time sometimes also in terms of e-mobility, because the fleets change, the investments change. There has been an act that has been prejudicial to a certain point of charging, and that changes the project. And so we need to have, let's say, a green light, a speedier green light for projects from our town halls, from the approving boards that usually depend from the public state that is governing our countries.
Duarte, thank you very much for that. I mean, I think those are some valuable learnings that South Africa can definitely take from what you said. In your opinion, your presentation talks about EV combat or the EV war. Give us your opinion. What do you think the outcome of the EV combat, EV war is going to be?
Right. Yeah. Thank you. So first of all, I think that I didn't mention hydrogen yet, but people are starting to speak about hydrogen. I think electric mobility is here to stay for the numerous vehicle disciplines that you can see. Not so much for heavy traffic or heavy cargo. There, I think hydrogen will have a play, but it's not going to be happening in the next 2 to 3 years. We're going to see still a good growth of electric mobility charging, electric mobility vehicles, new vehicles coming to the play field, and that's going to be important. So that's one of the things. The other thing is that I think that there will be a lot of consolidation in the sector, at least in the value chain of charging, even on the OEM side. But on the OEM side, I do not know as much as I know on the charging side, on the infrastructure side. You'll see a lot of companies buying others. You will see CPOs that are probably already regional being absorbed by larger playfields, larger operators. And then you will see also something which I think is very important, integration of, sorry? Okay, thank you. Integration of platforms for seamless servicing, for seamless payment systems. This integration will happen, it's needed, and it's going to happen sooner than later. In Europe, it's starting to happen already, and I would also assume that in other countries you will see that. Because the EV driver does not need to cope or to hassle with different networks, different pay method. What he wants is to have his EV car to be able to charge anywhere with one card, with one solution. And so that's something where I think operators still need to work in terms of the industrial platforms.
Fantastic, Duarte. I've got a question here, and I must be honest, I'm not quite sure I fully understand the question, but I'm going to ask it and see if you understand it. I have a gentleman asking, which platform or aggregators do the big petrol companies use to roam? Do you understand the question? I'm getting the question quite a few times. Do you understand that question?
Well, I mean, not totally, quite frankly, not totally. But, you know, from the technology standpoint, there are several players in the payment terminals that try to normalize the charging way of payment. So that's from the technology viewpoint. From the not regulation, but from the standardization standpoint of the plug and share, plug and surf, you know, the IEC norms. I think that these norms now, with the work that is being done in associations like Shut-in, is becoming more normalized, and that means that all the countries will tend to follow the norms of payment that are being addressed currently and being updated, as well as the norms for charging, you know, the sockets that you use, etc. So let's say South Africa, the sockets that are being used over there are pretty much the same that are being used in the European Union, which is good, which means that, you know, in principle, if you have a normalization of playfield in terms of payment cards, you can use, you know, the same card that I use here in the European Union when I travel to South Africa for business or pleasure. That's probably, but I don't have one platform that will consolidate everything. I think that you see agreements between players, which means that, let's take an EV driver that coming from the US that is using Electrify America will probably arrive into Germany, rent a car, and with the same car, you know, benefit from the roaming agreements that you might get between the players, and also charge in an Ionity, by giving an example, a Ionity charge point.
Fantastic. Well, Duarte, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day. With that brings us to the conclusion of your session, and thank you for sharing your thoughts on the EV war and EV combat. Really, really insightful for us to get an international perspective on what's happening out there, as well as to apply some of those learnings to what we're seeing here in South Africa. So thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, and a very, very good day to everybody in South Africa.